Hello, it's 10 a.m. on Wednesday, the 4th of March. You're tuned in to our mid-morning newscast here on Arirang TV. Thanks for joining us on this cold but sunny spring day here in Seoul. I'm Mark Broome. Let's take a look at the headlines. President Park Geun-hye signs a deal with the Saudi king to export a Korean-made nuclear reactor to Saudi Arabia. Her delegation will seek more agreements with the Arab kingdom today. The gloves come off in Geneva as the two Koreas clash over North Korea's human rights record. Seoul says Pyongyang should feel ashamed about its horrific abuses. Plus, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu launches a full-blooded assault on President Barack Obama's Iran policy during a controversial speech at the U.S. Congress. But we start with President Park Geun-hye's Middle East tour, and after a productive visit to Kuwait, the president is currently in Saudi Arabia, where she signed a number of agreements to expand their economic cooperation in the areas of nuclear energy, creative economy and healthcare. Our Chae-sun filed this report from Riyadh.
Even though it's the biggest supplier of oil to Korea, Saudi Arabia is seeking new non-oil energy sources for its rising domestic power demand. Riyadh plans to build a dozen or more nuclear reactors that can generate 18 gigawatts of electricity by 2040. At Tuesday's summit between President Park Geun-hye and King Salman, Seoul and Riyadh signed a deal to jointly invest into studying the prospect of building at least two of Korea's small 100,000 kilowatt nuclear reactors in Saudi Arabia. When the reactor construction is finalized after 2018, Korea expects a $2 billion order and the world's first export of a small to mid-sized nuclear reactor. Nicknamed SMART for its name System Integrated Modular Advanced Reactor, the multifunctional reactor is about 1/10 the size of the more common type of reactor and can be used to generate electricity and desalinate seawater. President Park anticipated entering the global market with Saudi Arabia after constructing the reactors in the Arab country, then exporting them together to a third country. Korea also signed an agreement to share policies related to President Park's creative economy model in the form of innovation-based startups and centers to support them. Korea's SK Telecom, which runs one of the government's innovation centers, separately sealed a deal with a Saudi telecommunications company to export the conglomerate government startup institute cooperative model to the Arab nation.
Many state leaders have identified with our creative economy model, and they've expressed an interest in forging a creative economy partnership.
Korean healthcare firms will also participate in a Saudi pharmaceutical complex project, and a hospital plans to share its medical technology with a Saudi cancer center. Chae-sun, Arirang News, Riyadh.
Now back here in Korea, and the nation's two main rival parties have passed a comprehensive anti-corruption bill aimed at stopping public officials taking gifts or cash in return for influence or favors. It's hoped the new law will help create a more transparent Korean society. Our Ji Myung-gil reports.
The ruling and opposition parties put the finishing touches on Korea's first ever anti-corruption bill before passing it through a vote in the National Assembly.
The passage of this anti-corruption bill will act as a cornerstone in making our society more transparent. Korea cannot become an advanced country if it keeps its rank as the 46th most corrupt country in the world.
The law stipulates that public figures with influence like government officials, lawmakers, reporters, and the faculty of public and private schools who receive $900 or more in cash can be jailed for up to 3 years or fined by up to 5 times the bribe's value. But if the official reports a bribery attempt, they'll be exempt from punishment. The newly enacted law will have a 1.5-year grace period before taking effect, so the government has time to check whether the law may unfairly affect individuals. Pundits worry that the details of the law may be unconstitutional or may infringe on an individual's freedom and possibly destroy their family relationships. Public officials can also face punishment if their spouses receive money and don't report it to authorities. Critics say the law may even restrict social gatherings, such as golf rounds, dinners, and drinks at bars, which in the long run could shrink the domestic economy. The government expects some 3 million people will be subject to the new law and will serve to enhance public transparency. Kim Young-gil, Arirang News.
And staying on that topic, the presidential office of Cheongwade was among those welcoming the passage of the anti-corruption bill. It says it respects the decision made by the ruling and opposition parties and that it hopes the new law will become the stepping stone to rooting out corruption in the country. The top office also vowed to follow up measures to support the new law. Now, as widely expected, the two Koreas clashed on Tuesday over North Korea's human rights record during a major meeting in Geneva. In his keynote speech to the UN Human Rights Council, North Korea's Foreign Minister Lee Soo-young said a previous UN panel report detailing human rights abuses in his country was based on false testimonies by defectors. He said the report and all of its findings should be expunged immediately. The North Korean official also slammed the UN human rights body for a perceived lack of fairness. Now, South Korea's Vice Foreign Minister Jo Tae-yeol fired back, demanding North Korea improve its, quote, horrific human rights conditions. The South Korean official said he felt pity that the North Korean minister had to stoop to the level of defending his country's atrocious human rights record, despite him knowing full well the extent of the abuses there. A top U.S. intelligence official has reiterated that it was North Korea and North Korea alone that launched the devastating cyber attack on Sony Pictures late last year. In an interview with U.S. network PBS on Tuesday local time, Director of U.S. National Intelligence James Clapper said he was confident that Pyongyang was the culprit. He also stressed that cyber attacks are one of Washington's top security concerns. Now, Clapper, who flew to Pyongyang in November to secure the release of 2 American detainees, added that he doesn't see change on the horizon for North Korea, but said he felt a slight optimism from the young people he saw there. China has hit the key period of its political year with the start of 2 very important meetings in Beijing this week. And one big focus is how the country's elite plan to tackle China's slowing economic growth. In the first of a special 3-part series on China's economy and its impact on Korean exports, our Kim Min-ji looks at the reasons behind the slowdown and what's being done to hopefully turn it around.
After decades of breakneck expansion, the Chinese economy wound down last year to its slowest pace in 24 years. It grew 7.4%, falling short of the government's target of 7.5%. At this year's major political meetings, China is expected to lay the groundwork for further reforms to aid this period of slowing growth.
China isn't expected to record double-digit growth anymore, given the size of its economy. Its exports and investment, which were once important growth drivers, are now seen as unsustainable.
China's exports have slumped in recent years due to sluggish global demand, and the country's heavy dependence on investments led to severe problems, including income inequality and an imbalance between consumption and investment. China describes the slowing momentum as the new normal, and efforts are underway to transform the economy to one that's driven by domestic consumption and services. The government has implemented various policies aimed at boosting consumption, such as accelerating urbanization, adopting universal health care, and easing regulations in the service sector.
China's consumption will start to rebound by 2020, according to our calculation. China's consumption will reach around 44% of GDP from the current 36%. By that time, Chinese consumption market will be $10.7 trillion.
Analysts see the slowdown in 2014 as a prelude for slower growth this year, as they don't foresee China's domestic-led growth to have an immediate impact. What's more, uncertainties loom for the global economy, depending heavily on the world's second-largest economy for growth, and Korea is no exception, who has China as its leading trade partner. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Now, domestic demand is drying up somewhat here in Korea, but Koreans heading out of the country for leisure or business are spending more than ever on their credit cards while they are in other countries. And experts say the growth is being driven by the increase in the number of budget air carriers and the relative strength of the Korean won. Our Shin Se-min reports.
Koreans spent a record amount on credit card purchases last year, reaching $12 billion, largely driven by a steady increase in the number of overseas travelers. More Koreans have been vacationing in foreign countries thanks to the weak yen and cheaper oil prices, which also drove down airfares. The money spent on overseas trips in January alone hit a record $1.9 billion, the highest so far, marking a 17% increase compared to the same month last year. And experts say that it's not just the high-income earners who's been traveling overseas.
A stronger infrastructure and cheaper flights have made overseas trips more accessible to a wider income group, leading to more money being spent there. And more travelers are taking advantage of the stronger Korean currency and using it as an opportunity to go overseas, mostly to Japan.
In the first month of the year, Korea's tourism deficit reached over $640 million, up over 40% from last year, the highest in 4 years. Experts say the imbalance of spending in and outside of Korea will likely continue unless the government aims to secure more travelers visiting Korea, like arranging more local tour packages. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Now, Japan-based internet services and mobile application company Line Corporation has signed a strategic partnership with CyberSource Visa, which is one of the world's largest providers of payment management services. Line, which is a subsidiary of Korean firm Geneva, will have access to CyberSource's payment management platform, which will enable a full suite of payment and fraud management programs for its mobile payment service Line Pay. Now, since its launch in 2011, Line has expanded to 230 countries, and as of January, more than 180 million people were regular users of its mobile messaging service application. So, are you ready to pay without having to pull out some cash or your credit cards? Well, as we just heard there, those days are fast approaching, and Samsung Electronics is getting in on the action as well. It has announced that it's going to launch its own mobile payment service in the second half of this year. Now, Samsung Pay will be featured on the Korean firm's recently unveiled Galaxy S6 and Galaxy S6 Edge smartphones. Samsung plans to secure deals with 6 local credit card firms by the summer. It has already inked deals with several U.S. financial companies, including the big boys, Visa and MasterCard. Now, this was made possible after Samsung's decision to acquire U.S. mobile technology firm Loop Pay, which gives it access to the technology that's featured on mobile payment services. Korea and the United States have pledged to step up their cooperation in setting up policies in communications. The head of Korea's communications regulator, Choi Sung-jun, met with his American counterpart Tom Wheeler on the sidelines of the Mobile World Congress in Barcelona, where they agreed to push for policies on net neutrality, also referred to as the open internet. Now, this means making sure governments or internet service providers allow the public to freely access data or services on the internet. The two sides also agreed on the rising need to balance privacy and the benefits of utilizing the Internet of Things and big data. The most important event in the motoring calendar, the Geneva Motor Show, kicks off this week in Switzerland. As usual, there are plenty of new cars on show, from the sublime to the weird and wonderful. Our Paulie has the rundown.
Sedans, trucks, compacts, SUVs, hybrids, and everything in between will be hitting the showroom floor this week in Geneva. Starting Thursday, leading automakers hope to win over drivers around the world via the 85th International Motor Show. In one of the show's first announcements, Volkswagen Passat was named Europe's new car of the year based on a vote of leading journalists across the continent. But aside from the awards, the conversation at the show has been dominated by the buzz that Apple is reportedly gearing up to introduce its own electric vehicle as early as 2020. In response, many traditional car companies are hoping to meet the challenge with their own array of tech-savvy features. Volkswagen, BMW, and Audi are leading the pack with better integration with smartphones and even smartwatches, while pushing the edge in autonomous driving systems. But analysts say these cutting-edge trends may take many more years before being adopted by mainstream consumers.
When you see the likes of BMW doing significantly well, continuing to talk about hiring more workers, VW also doing relatively well. And I think you see those mid-market brands, the GMs and the Fiats and Peugeots, perhaps continuing to be under some degree of stress.
The surge in research and development comes on the back of a recovering global auto market, largely due in part to high demand in the U.S. and China. The Geneva Motor Show is expected to unveil around 130 new models and concept cars during its 10-day run, giving a glimpse of the future of this ever-evolving industry. Paul Yi, ARIRANG News.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has delivered now his controversial speech before both houses of U.S. Congress. For more on this story and other global headlines, we connect, as we normally do, with Eunice Kim at the News Center. So, Eunice, Netanyahu didn't hold back at all in criticizing President Barack Obama's push for a diplomatic resolution to Iran's nuclear program.
That's right, Mark. Prime Minister Netanyahu called the Iranian nuclear deal, which of course is in the process of being shaped as we speak in Geneva, a very bad deal, and here's why.
A deal that's supposed to prevent nuclear proliferation would instead spark a nuclear arms race in the most dangerous part of the planet. This deal won't be a farewell to arms, it would be a farewell to arms control.
The Israeli leader said not only would the deal open an era of a nuclear Iran, but also a nuclear Middle East, where he says a battle between the Shia Iran and Sunni Islamic State has already begun. But some say those points are overblown, including his assertions that all restrictions on Iran's nuclear activity would expire after 10 years, and that Tehran was already dominating the Arab capitals of Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen. Now, Netanyahu's speech was punctuated by applause and standing ovations, as you can see there at the House chamber, but was also boycotted by more than 50 Democratic lawmakers who said it was only political posturing for the Israeli leader who faces a re-election at home in just over 2 weeks. U.S. President Barack Obama, who will not meet with Netanyahu this time, dismissed the speech as offering nothing new to the negotiations aimed at preventing Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. Tehran has held all along that its program exists to produce power and medical purposes.
And Eunice, in Iraq, a military push to reclaim the strategic city of Tikrit from the Islamic State extremist group continues for a second day. What do we know about the military operation on the ground now?
Well, Mark, both sides are poised for a long confrontation. Officials report a slowed operation, due to roadside bombs planted by IS militants who have controlled the city since June of last year. Now, Iraq Central Command Center said the most intense fighting is taking place in a town south of central Tikrit called Al-Dur, where IS militants are digging in with explosive-filled barrels and landmines. Some 250 families were evacuated on the outskirts of the mostly Sunni city, as 10 soldiers and allied fighters were reported killed so far.
Okay, Eunice, thank you very much for your reporting as always, and we'll see you back at noon.
See you then.
Hey, good Wednesday morning to you all as we kick things off with the 2018 Pyeongchang Paralympics this time, as the Pyeongchang Organizing Committee for the 2018 Olympic and Paralympic Winter Games announced on Tuesday that they've created what they're calling the Accessibility Manual. Now, the committee made it clear on Tuesday that the Winter Paralympic Games must be accessible not just for the competing athletes, but for visitors and attendees as well. And by utilizing both the accessibility guide made by the International Paralympic Committee and relevant Korean legislation, they will make sure that the event will have maximum accessibility and convenience. Now, some of the guidelines covered by the manual include certain standards for facilities like pedestrian passages and accommodations. Now, believe it or not, it's been nearly 13 years since the remarkable run by the Korean national football team during the 2002 Korea-Japan World Cup. And with time passing by, members of that legendary team continue to retire from the sport, most recently being Gi-hyun. Now, on Tuesday, it was announced that the former national team striker Gi-hyun will officially retire from the sport and make an official announcement at a press conference later today. And with his retirement, he'll become the interim head coach for the Seonggyungan University football team, and this according to his agency. The 36-year-old made one of the most memorable goals in Korean football history when he scored an 88th-minute equalizer against Italy during the 2002 World Cup, which eventually led to a 2-1 extra-time victory. Well, the Korean women's national football team certainly hopes to mirror what the 2002 men's national team did this June during the Women's World Cup. But before all that, the schedule for the April friendly matches were finalized on Tuesday. With head coach Yoon Deok-yeol and crew looking to be in top form before the big event, they're set to face off against Russia twice in April. Now, the matches will take place on April 5th and the 8th, with the venue being the Incheon Football Stadium and the Daejeon World Cup Stadium. Now, many Pittsburgh Pirates fans got a little taste of what to expect from Kang Jong-ho during his first inter-squad game, but now it's time for the actual spring training games. With the Pittsburgh Pirates playing the Toronto Blue Jays for their first spring training game here, Kang Jong-ho grounds out again his first at-bat, but launches a solo shot in his second at-bat, hitting his first home run as a Pirate. And what do you know, the kind of power he showcased during training is translated into the actual game, as Kang Jong-ho is off to a great start in his major league career. And that's going to wrap it up for me. This has been SJ. Have a great rest of the day, and see you guys again for your sports needs.
Well, it's beautiful outside under crystal clear skies, but actually it's freezing out there as a brief cold snap ahead of spring is here again. And it seems like that lots of sun will not help that much, as the afternoon highs are expected to be 4 to 5 degrees lower than yesterday. In fact, it will feel chillier than the actual temperatures. Strong winds will drag down the sensory temperatures to a lot lower, and strong wind advisory remains in effect for the coastal regions. With that, let's take a closer look at the readings for today. So while the daytime high in Seoul will only climb to 2, the top temperatures in Daegu will rise to 6 and Busan will get up to 8 this afternoon. And as for the other regions, Jeju Island and Daejeon should see a high of 5 and 4, and Tokdo rises to 1. This winter-like reading will continue till tomorrow, so dress warmly for tomorrow as well. Then we'll have spring-like weather for the upcoming weekend. Well, that's all for Korea, and here's international weather for viewers around the world.
Well, that's all we have for now. Plenty more stories online. It's also worth checking out our smartphone app so you can watch Arirang TV if you go to the coffee shop. We'll be back at noon Korea time with our next newscast. Until then, goodbye.